Welcome to the Business as Mission podcast, dedicated to those who long to see God glorified in business and the nations reached for Christ. Your host is Mike Bayer, longtime BAM leader and founder of Third Path Initiative, an online education resource for starting and growing BAM businesses around the world.
Well, welcome to another episode of the Business as Mission podcast. I'm Mike Bayer, and I am here with I kind of say old friend, although we may have shaken hands once in the world in our new virtual existence. But this is Derek Kessen. He's the managing partner for Heron Ventures, based out of Chicago, but literally reaching into the farthest spaces of the earth. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But first of all, welcome, Derek. Glad to have you.
Hey, Mike, great to be here. Yeah, I think when you meet people in the pandemic, it feels like you've known each other for a really, really long time. But even if you haven't seen each other and actually shaking hands. So
I'm going to say, a while back, the last major conference I can think of in the U.S. was probably the BAM conference in 2019 that was out in Southern California. Or not in Southern California, actually. It was in near Silicon Valley. And then everything went dark. And it's just starting to come back online. So that's fun. So we're going to hear your story. First, just for our audience, Derek and company work in an SEC, so that's a Securities and Exchange Commission regulated environment. So there will be certain things that he will not go into. If I start bumping up against the boundaries, he will very quickly tell me it is not because he's trying to be secret. It's just because the government, takes a look at these guys and makes sure that they're dotting their I's and crossing their T's. So I want to make that clear. If there's things you want to know, reach out to Derek directly. We'll give you contact information, which will also be in the show notes. He is open to questions. He's an avid teacher, willing to, just as we were talking a minute ago, Derek, just to build relationship and see what God does with it. So again, welcome to the show. So Derek, give us a little of your sort of non-BAM background. And I'm really curious kind of from that, and I'll ask you again, but I'm really curious is, all right, what were the steps along the way that God used to direct you to where you are today?
Yeah, it's when I think about my journey, I just think of the word cannonball multiple times. So I grew up in a really small town in central Illinois. I think we got our first stoplight when I was in 7th grade. So super, super small. Went to school for finance and accounting and at the University of Missouri, and moved up to Chicago shortly after I graduated in 2005. And so I've been working in the financial markets really ever since. So I started at a small boutique investment bank. I was employee about number 60, and we grew to about 350 people in my time there until 2019 when I left. The unique thing about sort of my journey there in the finance world is I wanted to work in finance, but I wanted to work for the good guys, if you know what I mean. And it seemed like there aren't that many good guys. And it's just necessarily, everybody is representing the interests of someone. And so you have to advocate for the people who you're representing when you're making investments. And so it can seem like kind of a selfish industry. But the unique thing about my journey was that I landed at this trading firm in Chicago. And it was founded by a couple of Wheaton College grads. So the few people on this call probably know that Wheaton College is a Christian college out in the suburbs of Chicago. And they really founded this firm to defend Main Street, the Main Street banks that are building the schools and the hospitals and lending to small businesses and farmers from the Wall Street trading banks who could take advantage of them pretty easily because they had access to information that these Main Street banks didn't have. So they went around the US, just training these community banks how to construct a bond portfolio, how to look at their regulatory risk, how to look at their asset liability position, and then also help them execute on trades in order to build those portfolios. So I learned a lot of really interesting things there that you wouldn't think you'd learn in an investment bank. Like one is asking the question, I wonder if that's true. And it was basically just this idea that we were going to take any kind of generally accepted truth in the investment space, and we were going to say, hey, I wonder if that's true. And part of the reason we did that was because the Wall Street banks were trading securities to the Main Street banks and saying, hey, use this metric to look at it and see how it looks really good. And the Main Street banks didn't know that actually they were giving them a metric that made it look like it was good. And so we said, well, what is that metric actually measuring? Let's actually get to the heart of what those assumptions are. And let's actually rebuild the math. And so if we rebuild the math, we can actually tell that security is not one that you want to buy. Let's actually look over here and find one that's better for your portfolio. So asking that question, just kind of like intellectual curiosity, is something that I've carried with me from just the traditional trading and investment banking space that then led to me kind of going out on my own in 2019.
So Derek, let me pause there for a second and dig into that just a little bit. When you came out of a small town, you went to I'm a Tennessee fan, you went to an SEC school. So that makes you highly educated in my book. But somewhere I'm really curious about, because I know you're not slamming the Wall Street bankers. That's not your point, but you do make the point about sometimes there's window dressing that investors, whether they're professional investors at a bank or individual investors, they need to dig deeper. What was it that awakened you to that? What made that matter to you?
Yeah, I think it was the whole reason I got into finance, and maybe I skipped over a whole part, but I remember when I was in junior high and my parents were on the phone with their financial advisor who lived in another town, maybe 45 minutes away. So our town was really small, and there wasn't really no internet then. I think we had like early days of dial-up AOL internet. Like I grew up with the internet as the internet was growing up. We're kind of the same age. And so I just remember my parents were educated. They both went to college. My dad was an engineer. My mom was a teacher, but they both specialized in something other than money. And I just remember that they were really reliant on this other person from another town that they didn't know that well to provide them financial advice. And so I just kind of like realized sort of the power that this person had. And thankfully they had a really helpful guy who really cared about them and wanted to help them with their portfolio. And in fact, you're legally obligated to do so by the government. Sure. But that to me, I was like, I'm an Enneagram 8. I'm like, anything that is like, that can affect me and I'm not controlling it, I need to learn about that. And so I think that was one where it's like really good, really smart people just spend their 10,000 hours learning something other than this. And so we have to take great care with this area because it's an area that other people just haven't spent as much time mastering. It's what I've spent my entire career mastering. So that's why whenever I'm trying to hang a picture in my house, I have to call my dad and I'm like, I don't know what's behind this wall. And he can tell just from FaceTiming that like, oh, there's wires behind there and there's plumbing over there. And I'm like, I don't know how you know that. But it's because his 10,000 hours are in something different than what So that was kind of what grew that spirit to really like know what's underneath it because I have to steward that well. It's really important. This is an asset for other people. So we have to take care of that.
Okay. No, thanks for clarifying that. I figured it was something like that. Usually when somebody feels the beginning of a call to a cause, there's a personal experience through which the Lord begins to say, hey, you should look deeper here. So I love that. All right. So you were going to tell us about going out on your own in 2019. Could you have picked worse timing?
I'm really good at that. I think that's one thing that I actually feel really fortunate about is like, I just am so convicted that God just doesn't measure things the way that we do. That I've just never worried about it in those sort of like cannonball moments. Sometimes it takes me a while to figure out what the heck he's up to. So it really started probably in 2015 or 16. I was on the phone with someone you all know from a company called Impact Foundation. And I was still working in trading and I was talking to her and I was like, we're thinking of starting this fund. It's going to be a city fund for the city of Chicago. All of our neighborhoods are kind of experiencing gentrification and that's not all good or all bad, but how do we be a good neighbor? How do we love our neighbor and provide access to capital to people who wouldn't normally have it? And they're kind of getting pushed out of their neighborhoods, but they run a business. And how could we, help them kind of adjust to the conditions of the neighborhood? I don't remember what I said, but I remember that it was dumb only because I remember what she said. And what she said was, well, Derek, God owns all your assets, right? And I just remember, now it's so hard to unlearn, but at that time I was like, he does? Like, I already gave him his part, right? Like I was still kind of stuck in this mentality of like tithe and then, invest however I want and whatever's going to make the most money. And so I think that was kind of the first exposure that I had to, hey, God's measuring this all differently than you think you're measuring it. And that took me then 4 years to get to a point where I was actually ready to leave and go like kind of pursue that full time. But for the record, not everybody has to do that, right? So there's a whole bunch of God honoring things I could have done in that time that didn't lead me to leave the job that I was in to go pursue this job full time. It took me probably 7 full years just to align my portfolio with what I think the kingdom, is available to us, how I can invest in kingdom purposes today. And I'm an investment professional. So I think just like if you're starting to hear these things and you're like, okay, how do I dip a toe in and how do I start doing this and how do I orient my portfolio in a way that's going to honor the kingdom? Like that might be what God is showing you in this time. What he was showing me was it's time for a cannonball moment and you're going to go out on your own. But I knew that because that's kind of who I am. So that's kind of how that started.
That's great. I'll pause for a second because I know just recently, within the last year or so, Don Simmons has come out with a book called Steward Investor, which really talks about that first part of what you were saying, the aligning your portfolio with kingdom purposes as much as is possible. And so you did that. That was a big first step, but you're beyond that now. You're into something different. So now you're out on your own. You're going through that process of learning. And I love that you said that, Derek, really, that every now and then I'll hear somebody say, I got in a flash, and it makes me nervous. God is a God of process. And so I love that. So what was that journey like? So moving from being in a big firm, you probably made decent money. God is beginning to talk to you about how he measures outcomes. Your perspective is changing. All these things are going on. What was that journey like? And ultimately, how did it lead to Heron Ventures?
So, I mean, I think at the outset, yes, I make a lot less money today than I used to make. And that's okay. And where I used to work was also an amazing place. And so like the things that I got to do while I was there, I got to hire a lot of people. I got to be a part of a lot of people's learning journeys as they were going out into the investment banking space. And so I really treasured my time there. But we had started to get a little bit bigger and we had to start kind of layering in some of those more processy type things. And I'm an entrepreneur. So like anytime we're layering in something that's like, you can't do this, you have to do this thing a certain way, I start to get a little contained. So I feel really at home, in the last 4 years that I've been an entrepreneur, even though I make a lot less money than I used to make. And so, yeah, going out on my own, I think the first thing that came to my mind was I can't do this by myself. And I don't think that, kind of like what you were saying earlier, we have a God of kind of, he's in the day to day, every day, all day. And so like, I don't think I'm done with even my portfolio, right? So we're going to have to keep working on it. I think I've done the best I can do for this day. And I'm going to be looking at it again every day as we, move forward. And so as I go out on my own, I really started looking for other people who might be interested in being along for this journey. It was long. I initially started a consulting company called On Center here in Chicago that's still here today. Initially, I needed to have some space from the financial world. And so I did for about 18 months. I was not working in the financial space, but we were really researching it. So it's just funny who God puts in your small group. So I'm sitting across from a gentleman named Jansen Hein, who now works with both Don and I, both on the Steward Advisor side and the Heron Ventures side. And we both kind of were switching on to this, like, what the heck is faith-driven investing at the same time? Of course, like people like you have been talking about this for a long time. We had never bumped into that space. And so we were like listening to podcasts at the same time and talking about it and trying to figure out what the heck we might do. And so we got a group of, there were about 10 or 11, almost all much older than us gentlemen, and said, hey, if we were to try to start an investment fund and actually try to invest in businesses in the frontier markets for God's purposes, what the heck would that look like? And we're not ready to do anything today. We just want to pray with you all. And so we met every week for, I think, a little over a year. Now, it was during the pandemic, so we really couldn't do a lot of anything. Yeah. But that was kind of what we committed to, was that cadence. Along the way, a mentor of mine introduced me to a guy named Mike Live from beeffortea.org. And he said, hey, if you're interested in investing in God's purposes in frontier markets, you got to meet this guy, Mike. And I think one of the things I've noticed is there just really aren't a lot of on-ramps to the space. Most private equity and venture capital firms are really small. It doesn't take a lot of people to run these things. And frankly, until you get scale, most of them lose money anyway, unless you start with $10 million. And so I think that it's necessarily that's difficult to find an on-ramp. So I was looking around and there wasn't really any way to get my hands dirty. And Mike said, well, hey, why don't you just volunteer with us? Help us do some of this stuff and help us put together some training and help us talk to our investors and all of that kind of stuff. And so I just kind of got immersed in the space, and it just opened up the world for me. I don't think I really contributed a whole lot. I hopefully didn't hurt anything, but it it really helped like just me touch and feel and see. And that's how I learn, is by actually doing. I have no fear of failure. So I'll just go try it. And then once I mess it up, then I'm like, okay, cool. Well, now I know how to do it. I'll go back and do it again, like the second time. Most of the time, obviously there's times like when helping her, she had to be more careful, but thankfully I work. Jansen, who I mentioned, is a guy who can read a book and then like go do that thing. So that's something I'm very wish was something that I had, but since I don't have it, I get to have it in my partner. So, we're still kind of chugging along, and we're just really noticing this need for a fund. And most of the investing that we had seen through b4t.org was kind of peer-to-peer. So they would introduce an investor to a business, whether that was, they have, I think, probably like 13 or 14 different countries that they operate in Africa and Asia. And so I'm like, okay, there's got to be some kind of formal investment vehicle. And along the way, I kept having conversations. It was just people were introducing me to people like left and right. Like, thankfully, there wasn't always something to do, but I just remember like Tommy Lee introduced me to Henry Kasner and introduced me to Tony Chen, and then to Ray Barrett, and then to Don Simmons, and then to Tom Lernahan. And then like, it just like the list kind of went on and on and on, and people were just really gracious with their relationships. And so that just became this like on-ramp of learning and just like starting to talk to people about what I wanted to do. And just in kind of saying what it was that we wanted, then like kind of the opportunities kind of started coming our way. And so Ray Barrett was actually the one who invited me to a meeting in Kansas City. And it was a couple of folks from Impact Foundation, National Christian Foundation. Don Simmons was there. And there were probably like 12 or 14 people maybe total. And it was kind of this idea that faith-driven marketplace was coming online that winter, and FDI was really thinking through like, okay, so we're going to have some like kind of US-based investment opportunities on there. We're going to have some frontier market opportunities on there, which necessarily at that time all looked a lot more risky for a lot less return. And so kind of everybody was kind of thinking through like, what does it look like to have those businesses up there together? What if this thing like really takes off and people are doing a lot of investing through this marketplace? Why would they ever do the frontier market investment? Because the other ones automatically are just going to look safer and you'll be like, hey, that was Kingdom. That was great. So at that meeting, everyone was all just really thoughtfully thinking about how do we think about the on-ramps? How do we think about investing in the frontier markets? And somebody who wasn't there, but was represented by Don, was Dick Whitebear. And so Dick and you and Bob Bush, my understanding, had kind of all gotten together a few years back and said, hey, how do we just create a fund for this? And how do we create a way that people can safely invest, have their money managed professionally, and have it there and have people acting on your behalf to find the opportunities and going out and building something with scale? Because you really, it's hard to scale anything if you're just kind of doing peer-to-peer all the time. And so that was kind of the start of, I know that you guys had the investment vehicle going, you had a management company, and it was managing a fund, and you were looking for investment opportunities, and you're also looking for somebody to manage it. And so I'm sitting in that room and I'm like, I don't want to speak out of turn, but that's literally what I'm trying to do. And I think Don was the one who said, hey, like, let's all work together. Why I keep feeling like I see like another small fund popping up, another small fund, and assets under management are really the game. You have to get enough assets under management to be sustainable. I think the management company. Okay, so maybe I'll fast forward.
Well, let me make a quick comment while you get it revved up. I guess your next cannonball moment. The period of time you're describing to me was a very needed turn in the BAM movement. You described what happened before perfectly. We went from a network of pioneers out there who knew each other, but we were doing it in different countries, and it was making impact, but it was not scalable. These little informal networks aren't. God was doing something, and then thanks to the leadership of people like Mats Tunahag, it began to form up into a more recognized network now called BAM Global and other, B4T and other organizations, and so that began to scale to this day. It's literally everywhere. But the great missing ingredient, you put your finger on it, was we didn't have a financial vehicle to go along with us. So we were still hiking. We needed to be in a truck or something, but we were still hiking. And so then God starts working in guys like you and Don and Henry and Ray and other people, Dick, people like that, saying this peer-to-peer, hey, I'll help this guy because I've met him and I like him. That's fine. I love that. But we all felt like we needed something that none of us knew how to build. And along come, you guys, this whole circle of guys that know investing, know how to set up funds, know how they work, what they need. So I just, first of all, let me just say thank you to you and Henry and others for being so sensitive to what God was doing at that time, because it really has helped us turn a corner. I think we're still turning, but it is very much the way of the future, and I love it. So all right, back to where you were, but there's so many. I want to stop you about every 2 minutes, and I'm not going to. I promise.
No, it's okay. I get rambly, so jump in whenever you want. Yeah, it really, it's been such a unique and like redemptive journey for me. I think especially at a time, you look at the regular American workplace and it's really struggling right now. And you have new people coming in, the millennial generation, who are like, I don't want to do things this way anymore. And like, why do we have to like earn our stripes in this way and be the bottom man on the totem pole all the time? And why did everybody at the top gets to make all this money and live a great life, and I get a week of vacation and all of it. So like, I think that there was a lot of sort of upheaval in the American workplace where like sort of like I'm an elder millennial, but I'll just say people older than me and people younger than me really having trouble seeing eye to eye. And I think what's really neat about this space is that we've got people who are younger coming in, and we're working together with the people who have come before us and laid the foundation. I couldn't do any of the stuff I'm doing if it weren't for people like you laboring for 35 years to build this foundation that now I can look around and say, well, what can we do now? Right. So it's created this grand opportunity, I think, for us to continue to grow and evolve. And I just say we're a learning organization. We just keep learning from the people who came before us. I think you said it before the call, like, if you've learned a lesson already, why should I learn that one again? I want to learn that one from you. Like you telling me instead of falling in the pile myself.
Right. Yeah. You go read the book. Don't step in the same pit I did. Right. And you'll be doing that soon. I'm looking forward to whenever your book comes out. But
I know I just turned 40, so I'm like, I don't know, like the gray hair is here. It's like I'm turning. Yeah. So I think what was really neat is we all left that meeting in Kansas City, and I think it was the first time that I felt like, hey, we might be able to do something. I'd never raised the fund before. I'd always worked in trading and investment banking. And like, so the mechanics of it were something that I understood, but it was like, yeah, I had to go find $5 million somewhere. Like, how the heck am I going to do that by myself? Right. And so it was really neat kind of coming away from that moment and being like, I think we can do something here. And so it took a little bit of time. And I think Dick and Don started working together. I was still kind of like on the edges with our kind of group of like 10 guys that we were all trying to figure something out. And finally, we found our first investment that we wanted to do, which was a business called Pure Flow in Uganda that had never taken an investment before. And so we kind of were walking with them for a little bit, and we're like, I think we want to do this. And so I called Don and I said, hey, I think we've got one. And so are we going to create something new, or are we going to work together? And he's like, oh, please bring that into the fund. Don't do that separately. Let's all start working together. So that really, like, I think in a way we had to kind of earn our way in of showing like, hey, we're actually bringing something to the table. Also, this isn't just going to be like everyone has to bring something to this in order to be a part of it. And so it was really neat. And then just seeing, I think what was really cool about Dick in that season is, Dick's involved. He's been involved from the beginning. I think you guys got it started at the end of 2018, going into 2019. And he very much is around for our investment committee meetings and things like that. But the way that he's been able to just kind of like turn the reins over to someone else, I know that would be really hard for me. And so I think just like, it's really cool to say like, I'm going to build this thing and it's actually for someone else to run, not for me, I think is just a crazy, wild, God honoring thing that like God was working in all of us to kind of put this thing together in a way that was going to work. So that's kind of how that evolved over time. We formally acquired the management company from Dick in 2021, which then we ultimately ended up renaming to Heron Ventures just for some points of confusion and things like that, things that had the same name. And so Heron Ventures is now what the management company is called, and we manage a couple funds. Our second one is coming out in the first quarter of next year. And so, yeah, but Dick remains involved. Don remains involved, but it's really mostly four of us: Jansen and I, and Jonathan. Thiessen is our third partner, and then Brady Ellis is our principal. So we're the ones kind of doing the day to day now as things get moving. But that whole thing was just a wild ride. That like those relationship things should be really hard, and it really was pretty effortless. I'm not saying that like things haven't been hard. Like things have come up for sure, for me, for Dick, for Don, for others, but it's like the way that we've been able to process those things together have been pretty powerful.
Well, and that's an amazing thing, because when you look at, and I know you probably knew this going in, I know you know it coming out, when you go into something that's going to require not just legalities and regulatory environment, but it has to have relationship, right? I mean, I don't care if it's a secular investment company or, Christian or kingdom or whatever we want to call it. It still comes down to the relationships of the guys. And I, for one, would expect, I've certainly seen this in the church world, something about when money comes in, grace seems to diminish. And so, yes, you've had conflicts. There's been arguments and challenges and also great breakthroughs and joyful discovery. So I love this thing you said. It hasn't been without its problem, but God has prevailed this time. This has not been something that blew up and people splintered to the four, corners of the earth. I mean, you guys have hung together, and, from Dick, who, those who don't know him, is kind of the elder statesman. I mean, Dick's in his early 80s. He's got a passion for the world and for gospel and transformation and for church planting. And then you're one of the young generation, you guys and Henry and others coming in with the same passion. So obviously there's natural tensions, but you guys have powered through it. Or let's put it this way, God's led you through it. You really haven't powered through it in your own strength. But I appreciate that you said that, because so many want us to, and then, we lived all, happily ever after. And that's not the kingdom, right? Through much tribulation, so you enter the kingdom. So
yeah, I think we say, I think before this, I don't think I knew what spiritual warfare was. And I wouldn't have been able to identify it. And I think the way that it shows up a lot is in relationships. And I'll notice it in myself, where I'll get upset about something. And then it's like, if I just sit with it long, I'm like, why am I even upset about this? It's like, we're all being provoked to find something wrong with this, because this isn't something that the enemy wants to see on the earth. And so I think that has been also just okay, let's all take a breath. What do we do next? And so I think that's been a big part of it as well.
We'll be right back after a short break. The Business as Mission podcast is in partnership with TriVenture, the BAM Launchpad. TriVenture offers the 3 ingredients every entrepreneur needs to launch and scale a BAM business: courses, coaching, and capital. For more information, visit triventure.com.
So, Derek, when you look at this, now that kind of brings us up close to the real time. So, when you think about Heron Ventures, the new name for the management company, and I look at this, okay, I could posit what I think the vision is, but you particularly, I mean, what is your vision? You and your partners and your principal, when you guys look at this and you say, why do we get up in the morning? And where are we going? What are the things that you see in the future?
I think I'll start maybe just with an observation about kind of the broader movement. I know that some people see things in a little bit more black and white, bright lines. Some people see things in a little bit more gray. I'm an ultimate gray person. So when I hear people talking about business as mission, business for transformation, faith-driven investment, kingdom business, whatever you call it, I'm like, to me, it's one big blob of things that honor the kingdom. And obviously there are ways we do it well, and there are ways we do it not so well. And so I see a lot of sort of debate over is it BAM? Is it B for T? Is it faith-driven investment? And I sort of don't care, if that makes sense. So what we're looking for...
Makes perfect sense. We're not looking to brand anything, right? That's the problem. I don't want to put a stamp or a logo on it and say, that's mine.
Yeah, I went to an SEC school. Like we said, I ain't going to be the one that comes up with a new name for something, all right? So I'm going to roll up my sleeves and get to work. And so I think as we have progressed through the space, we just said, we are going to be a learning organization. So that's on the front end. We are learning from people like you. We're learning from people who have go buy FDI or go buy beef for tea or go buy whatever. And we just want to be a part of this broader movement of people, and not see those kind of lines be a thing that sort of like divides us from one another. And then I think as we started learning, we noticed a few things. One was that we think small as Christians. I think when we're looking at the frontier markets, we noticed there were very few people doing, true medium and larger style investments. It was a lot of kind of projects. And I think there was a little bit of a belief. And some of this, I think, comes from the world of missions, of how missions have evolved over the years. And I'm not being critical of missions. I have a lot of good missionary friends and love the work that they're up to. But I think a lot of it can happen kind of at like sort of the fringes of society rather than in sort of the centers of commerce where work is happening. And so I just as looking at a business, so we're a for-profit business that invests in for-profit businesses that are operating in an economic environment. We said, okay, we've got a lot of like kind of pastor and three goats, kind of happening in this space. And like, how do we actually mature that? And how do we actually look up and say, like, I actually think that our investment activity can shape a whole nation. What if we had that audacity to say that this could actually shape culture the way that we're kind of showing up in this space? And so we just started asking questions around that and seeing the way that local faith-driven ecosystems are growing. So all of our investment activity is outside of the West. So maybe just a quick...
call them frontiers. Is your
frontier
term.
and emerging markets. I would say about half of them are emerging markets and about half of them are frontier. Frontier, just think of it as like less developed than emerging. And so what we look for is there a local group of faith-led business people that are operating in the center of commerce in their environment? Do they have influence? Do they have convening power to bring other people along to sort of shape a movement? And do they have a vision for how they want to see their country, their city, and their culture shaped by the gospel? So it's not our vision that we're bringing into another country. We're the plumbers. Like, we are the humble plumbers that know how all of this stuff works. We get the wrenches out and figure out how the financial plumbing is supposed to work. That's the thing that we bring to the table. And we don't lead the table. We're a part of the table, right? And so I think that's a sort of a fundamental shift that's happening, is that just with access to information and things like that, you're seeing, and honestly, like years and years of investment in the global South, you're seeing really talented, really wise people that can lead this movement in their own countries. And then we just have one piece that they don't have, so we can sit at the table with them. And so that's what we're looking for. And that's been an evolution. It's been a hard one. It's come from taking our licks from people in the frontier markets. And so I think I wrote a blog post, which I don't think was even from me, on my way home from Kenya last year. And it was kind of all about this, sort of the ways that's like some of the scales were getting removed from my eyes, about how I think I was finally trusted enough by frontier market leaders for them to tell me the truth about how it felt to work with investors like me. And I think we finally were able to get to some things that we needed to change. And it wasn't because like necessarily it was what we were doing was bad. It was just outdated and not as good as what we could be doing going forward. And so we said, next time we come back, we're not going to do it that way. And so that's my commitment to you. And so some of those things we're establishing local offices in the places that we're investing. So we're kind of no longer doing what will kind of, I think if you're looking for the more negative term, is like flyover capital. And so we'll see, we're capital markets people. We're looking at the local capital markets ecosystem. We're looking at the industries that the government is investing in. And we're looking for businesses that can really be businesses of influence and be lighthouse entrepreneurs for the people around them. And we're saying that's the movement that we want to get behind with our investment activities. We're not kind of going to fly in, ignore all of that movement that's getting made because, my friend Tim met a guy on a missions trip who has a business out in the country somewhere. I'll invest in that, because I have a friend that met them. I'm actually going to become a part of this ecosystem with them. And that's really going to lead our investment activities rather than kind of flying over the movement that's happening and investing in something kind of on the side.
As I listen to you, Derek, I'm thinking, in the early days of BAM, or again, like you said, whatever you want to call it, almost everything, not everything, was small to mid-size enterprise investments of, $5,000, $10,000, $50,000. And it was appropriate to the time and still is. There's still a need for that. But what very few people seem to think through was the larger companies. They sort of jumped from, some private equity to huge corporations. And there was this space in the middle that said, this is really what's scalable. I love the movement of small businesses. That's what I spent most of my career, not just BAM time, helping people start small businesses. But I've also recognized, as you have, that there are limitations. Not that one is good or bad. Everybody has a role to play. But there are limitations into what the little, nano enterprise, micro enterprise, SME space can do in terms of societal transformation. Not to limit God. God can do whatever. Right. But there's a bigger play. And I look at biblically, I look at people like Joseph and Daniel and others that, they played in the big leagues. They didn't play in the villages and in the burbs. They played in the big leagues. And so I think as you're talking, it strikes me that two things, and I'll throw this out. I'd love for you to respond to it. One is this is a space whose time has come, or at least the train is at least approaching the station. And the other is that we've got to figure out how does the entire ecosystem, from the small to the very large, how do we figure out how to work together and support one another and respect one another, because we're all playing for the same coach. That to me, again, I know I'm mixing metaphors like crazy, but you get where I'm going on that. And I think that's important to understand. Do you want to pitch back on that or comment?
Yeah, that's spot on. And everything you said before that was spot on also. And I think it's not about the size. Again, like God doesn't measure things the way that we measure them anyway. It's about, is it right fitted for what God's put in front of you, right? And so I think that finance, money, private equity, venture capital, investment, all of that, they're just tools, right? They're constructs mostly that we created that help match up a risk reward and investment horizon profile for an investor and an investment opportunity in order that, growing businesses can raise money to then go, scale their opportunities and create jobs and all of that. So they're just contracts, and we can write them however we want. And the only thing is you got to stay within the confines of what the regulatory bodies allow you to do for those different things. Yeah. But I think because that's my world and those are the things that I've been exposed to my entire career, that I'm looking for a certain kind of thing. There's also people who have spent their world in the development space, and that's what they have 10,000 hours in. And so there's a lot of opportunities, I think, for blended finance. Again, these are just tools. So how do you utilize charitable capital in a really unique and redemptive way? How do you use, because I think one of the things I've heard Don say a lot is in order to create an environment where money can actually go back and forth a lot more freely, some of the more wealthier among us will have to kind of de-risk this space. And I think he's right. I think coming in and trying to grow some of these different things, we're going to have to take risk that doesn't quite make sense maybe for the average investor. And it's because we're looking for different kinds of returns, but that's because we're pushing on kind of on the edge. So I think, I sounded a little bit critical with the pastor and three goats thing. I'm like, if that's the thing that you're called to, I think that's awesome. And it's about the relationship that you're building with that pastor and his congregation and his family and all of that. That's really meaningful. And if that's the thing that's right in front of you, and sometimes I've had a season of, you're just supposed to wait right now and not do anything. And that was actually the most impactful or whatever thing that I can be doing in order to follow Jesus in my life. And so I think right now, we see grand opportunity for the tools and frameworks that we're using to start shaping something a little bit bigger. As soon as some of these things start getting figured out, I don't think that we'll probably be the ones really leading the movement on that. We're just participating, So, but I think you're right. There's the time is now. We're seeing a lot of, I think, the fruit of the labor of years and years and years of people who've been in this movement before I was born, who now have paved the way for us to come in and bring a redemptive type of investing that maybe isn't even what we see in the US today. But certainly in the frontier markets, you see mostly two things. You see toxic dependency from charity that's maybe lasted a little bit too long. Mm-hmm. And you see extractive investing from investors from outside extracting most of the wealth that's created from the productivity of local entrepreneurs off of the continent. And so it's not too hard to do something a little bit more redemptive than both of those things. And so that's where we're trying to actually show a different kind of investing to that space. But I think you're spot on.
No, I like the way you put it. And I think that, again, we're all, you said in the beginning, you're a learning company. The one beautiful thing to me about, and again, whatever label we want to move, we'll call it the movement. Whatever God's doing in the world, one of the beautiful things about it is that nobody has all the answers, and we're all learning. Some of the early guys, we stepped into it with we didn't know what we were doing. We were just responding to a need that God placed in front of us. And so I think there's I hope there's a certain humility that comes with it that says, Lord, I think this is what you're leading me to do now, but I'm open to anything you want to lead me to do tomorrow. And I hear that same spirit in you, which to me is, that's how we're going to pull this off. And a friend of mine years ago, I can't remember who it was, quoted somebody that said, life is basically, this is the way he put it. He said, we are just 20-second walk-ons in God's grand cosmic drama. Right. And it's like, in the grand scheme of things, the guy that walks across the stage and maybe has a line, maybe, and then he's gone. Right. He's not the story. We're not, Jesus is the story, and the things that he's doing in his holistic restoration of mankind and his creation is just the fact that we get to be a part of it. All right. Let me, we could do this all day. We've already gone long, and I don't care. It's great. I love the story. I can't wait to continue it. But I want to bring us down for a moment, because we're way up. I want to bring us kind of down to feet on the ground for a second. You mentioned Pure Flow, and this is for those of you who haven't heard of Pure Flow, or I guess Pure Flow Boda, that sometimes they call themselves. Go to the Heron Ventures website. They're featured there as one of the investments that they've made. It's a great story, and I don't expect you to tell the whole story. We've had the two guys on before, but I'll set it up this way. So these two guys, one in particular, went to Uganda and discovered something that was shocking. There were these sort of loan sharking, pawn shop, lease-to-own sort of businesses that were ripping off the Boda, which is a little motorcycle, taxi driver, so to speak. And they were kind of created almost like this permanent position of servitude and dependency, and it was really quite a ripoff. And so he figured out, and wasn't his background, but he figured out if he could create a chance for these Boda operators to ultimately own their machine, and he created a way to do that it could change their lives. And within that community, he built a fellowship where they would have meals together on a regular basis, which is, go back, I'll put the episode number in the show notes. It's a great story. But what I want to ask you, Derek, is what was it about that it inspired you and the team? And I know there were others that whose names we haven't mentioned, but what was it about that as an example that attracted you to say, that's the kind of business we want to invest in?
I think there's a lot of things. I think initially, so maybe just to take a step back, so some of the founders in our portfolio are local to the countries that they're in, and some of the founders are not local to the country that they're in. So this was an example where they were not local to the country that they were in. And in those instances, we're looking for teams that are building teams that are going to outlast them. And so that was something that very early on when we met them, we just realized, okay, so they really are all about building a local team that really is going to be the team that carries forward this business, that's going to outlast, Colin and Jared in their time there. And they're kind of out, continuing to broaden the influence and build a bigger network for the business. But yeah, so that was one. I think two, I really love unit economics. If I can do it on the back of an envelope or in my head and see like, okay, this is a business that works. It was also, like you said, the Boda motorcycle drivers who they could be a taxi driver, they could deliver food. But it's really, that's the way you get around in East Africa. Were in these sort of perpetual leases. So they could actually never own their bike. And so it was really easy math even for Colin at the time to say, okay, so if I just bought the bike and after 18 months, I keep your payment the same and then you own the bike, like, why wouldn't I do that? And we can make a little money at the same time to keep this business going. And so I think it was that. It was also Colin had a big active faith. He was a young guy. He flew home to California, cleaned out his bank account, bought 6 bikes. It was like $6,000 at the time, right? And so he bought 6 bikes and watched, these guys ride away with his life savings. And so I think that there's there's a lot of those things. We also spent a few times getting to know each other, making sure that we felt really comfortable with it. The fellowship groups were huge. I think it was also just very thoughtfully tied in with the rhythm of their day. So basically they had set up the first center where the guys would come in to pay their weekly payment on their bike. And that's when they would do the fellowship group. They would also then have access to spare parts for their bikes. And they would also have a washing bay to clean their bike and take care of this asset that's going to be theirs in 18 months. And also have community and have, a pool table and soda machines and things like that. So it was just really thoughtful about like, let's actually make this part of their like natural rhythm every week to come to this place where they've got to come and make their payment anyway. And then they'll kind of do their fellowship group. And I think at the very beginning, so they had about 60 or 70 drivers, I think at the beginning when we met them. They call them members. And they had members who were Christian and they had members who were not Christian. And I think the way that the non-Christians in the group were like, these fellowship groups are helping us. And this whole model is helping us. And so they would encourage both Christians and non-Christians to go to the fellowship groups. And so I think that there was just, you could just see it. And if you looked at their Instagram, you're just like, this team has joy, right? And so I think that all of those kinds of things together, we thought like, this is something that we can see scale and opportunity. We also, it came with a lot of risks, right? So those bikes are owned by somebody, right? Yeah. And they don't want that model to be broken. And so I think that it was also an opportunity for us to thoughtfully step into that space and say, okay, this kind of idea of more thoughtfully doing this is out there. Can we start pushing against sort of the sharks and see what happens? Can we make sure that we have the people in place to take care of the people if something happens? They had trackers on every bike so that if somebody got in a wreck, they would be the people who responded and make sure that they got medical attention. And so like things like that. So do we really believe that if we're sort of pushing against a corrupt thing where that those corrupt people will not be happy? Do I think that we actually have the team and the staff in place to support the local people who are sort of benefiting from this program and then contributing to it as they go? So those are some of the things that we saw. Obviously, it's a much bigger story than that. I think they hit 2,000 members in their program last year.
Yeah, from 6 to 2,000 in just a few years. That's pretty amazing. But I love where you're going with it because this is also what light does to darkness, right? It's not just business making money. It's not just helping some individuals, but they're actually pushing the boundaries of light against the boundaries of darkness. And that's what the kingdom looks like. So, all right, like I said, we could go on forever. We're going to bring it in for a landing. Couple of thoughts. I am a tiny investor in Heron Ventures. Tiny investor, and he's you can't see it, but Derek's nodding his head. Yes, you are tiny, but that's okay. I get it. But I do want to say to our listeners, if you have an interest in learning more, that you might employ some or all of your capital into a kingdom-focused management company and the funds they manage versus, and I got to be careful if I'm saying something I shouldn't. I'm looking for him to give me the fat throat, but I'm trying to avoid the boundaries here. There is a place on the site, which is heronventures.vc, not com, heronventures.vc. Go there, ask for more information about what an investment could look like, just to get educated. And also, if you're a potential, or if you're a founder looking for capital, again, just listen to some of the things that Derek said, the kinds of things they're looking for. Reach in for more information. We talked about this earlier. This is not, you're not making an application. This is not a formal process on either side. It's just to get to know you, but know that, and Derek told me this originally, hey, it's all about relationship. We're happy to have those conversations and see where it goes, see what God does. So, all right, this is how I'm glad we finally got to do this. You guys in the audience don't know that Derek and I have been playing schedule tag for, it seems like months, trying to get this, but God finally gave us the time. So, Derek, last word is yours. And so please just give us a shot from the heart.
Shot from the heart, I think, is just that we're all on a journey. I'm on a journey. The entrepreneurs we invest in are on a journey, and investors are on a journey. And I think that finding a guide is really important. And we are not that guide for what it's worth. So maybe you need to know that, first of all. I'm happy to go on a journey with you because I love talking to people about it. But also, there are investment advisors who will help you look at everything in your investment portfolio, help you think of like temporal things like saving for college and your retirement, also while thinking about the eternal things of how am I thinking about God's kingdom in the way that I'm stewarding investments. And so it's really important to have a financial advisor who's helping you think through those things. I know enough to be dangerous, but I'm not a financial advisor for individuals. We manage a fund. And so I think that that's just an important piece right out of the gates. And so I think I just encourage people to learn. I think one thing with the first investment fund that we put together was that we weren't going to be worried about minimums. And so that's the thing that for the most part in the investing space and private equity and venture capital, you got to have $250,000 or $500,000 or something like that in order to have access. And that's because of the way that the fund economics work. You're limited to a certain number of investors. And so then therefore you have to get enough scale. And so we've been fortunate enough that we've had some folks come in with larger investments. And so every time we have somebody come in for a larger investment, then that means we can kind of hit our fund economics and allow smaller people to come in as well. So I think we actually just this year, we've been paying money in to keep the management company going every year. This is the first year that without getting paid any money from the fund or from the management company, we've just been able to cover sort of compliance and the legal costs. And so that maybe wasn't a good final word, but that's an invitation to people, whether you've got a lot of money that you're stewarding, whether you're just trying to put something in so you can follow it and see kind of what happens and dabble. I'm happy to be your point of conversation with that. And I probably you're going to have to tell me you want to do it 3 times. I'm probably going to tell you no, and that you need to have a guide and all of that kind of stuff to make sure that I know that you're serious. Because it's risky. It's one of the most risky things you can do, but it's for the kingdom.
All right. So I'm gonna last word your last word, just to emphasize a couple things. I really appreciate, number one, Derek saying, I'm not your financial advisor. And I want to make that clear. As some people might, he'd be a great financial advisor for me. That's not what you do. You guys have a management company and you're going to manage multiple funds for investment purposes aligned with the kingdom. So that's one clear distinction. And the other, you really actually clarified something for me, is I'm not kidding when I say I'm a teeny tiny member of the fund, but the understanding the way funds work, that, again, with a limited number, and if we're all teeny tiny like me, then it's going to be a teeny tiny fund, which will have teeny tiny impact. So the ability to think about larger numbers is not Derek and company trying to get rich. It's Derek and company saying, you need to understand how this machinery, you said plumbing, how does this plumbing work? And I think that's huge. And so thank you, brother. Thanks for being with us. I've really enjoyed this. I'm totally energized. Can't wait to talk more. And we'll be putting this out. This is December 29th, and we'll be putting this out sometime probably in January. So I want to and let your network know to check out the podcast and hear your story. We'll be doing.
I gave the date away with my Starbucks Christmas cup.
Shameless plug. There you go.
Yep.
All right. So thanks so much, Derek. Guys, look for the information in the show notes. Go to the website. Reach out if you need to dig in, learn more. Read Don Simmons' book, Steward Investor. Hopefully there'll be more like that coming out. This is a new era in the world of businesses, mission, kingdom business, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm excited to know somebody that's taken a lead in it. Good to see you, brother. Thanks so much.
Thanks for having me, Mike.
Thanks for listening to the Business as Mission podcast. We invite you to become part of the story by supporting the BAM podcast at patreon.com/BAM Stories. There's a link in the notes with this episode. For more information, go to thirdpathinitiative.com or tryventure.com. Please share this podcast and give us a review wherever you listen.